today I'm going to talk about my favorite topic, redesigning the role of water in future cities. As many of you know, water is often invisible in the cities that we live in. It's carried through many miles and kilometers of pipes, makes it moves from location to location, and we don't see what happens behind the scenes. So the goal is to make sure in future cities we have a very different model, if possible, to make sure people more appreciate the resource more. With that, I am going to move forward. As many of you know, 70% according to the United Nations, 70% of the world's population will be living in urban areas by 2050. And 60% of those cities have not yet been built. This means that we have an immense opportunity to rethink and reimagine how we introduce water in these cities and how we design these cities. Obviously, we are experiencing a lot of different impacts of climate change, from floods to tornadoes, to wildfires, to droughts. Each one of these are sort of manifesting themselves through different water mediums. So it's too little water, too much water, and water in the wrong place. So it is important to kind of think about adaptation to climate change as a way of rethinking water in cities. When we think about water in our cities, often it's between, you're thinking about water demand and water supplies. And often the utilities or any governance body or agencies that are responsible to make sure to bring water to people, they actually have to make this balance work. They have to think about, and often they focus on the supply side. Is there a water supply source that they can bring to make sure they provide reliable water supplies to people? So from groundwater to surface water to alternate water supplies, every one of these things sort of fits into the concept of supply side water management, which is our 20th century model when we think about water supply. Often what we have done in the 20th century, we have actually carried water from different distances, treated it, brought it to people. They use it once, it leaves our cities, it leaves our homes, and then eventually our cities. Regardless of where we live, this model has always been a sort of the foundational model for the way we design water infrastructure. It's very linear. It basically treats water to the highest quality, brings it to our homes and communities, and we use it in one way. We use it for many different purposes, but then that water is collected and leaves the city. And often when you ask people where the water comes from and where it goes, they cannot really fully explain what it takes and where this water comes from and where it goes, which is a big problem. Again, and one of the foundational things for also this system has always been, there is always enough water that we can bring from far distances or even local places to meet water demand. There was an assumption that demand is a steady and perpetual, is experiencing steady and perpetual growth. So it's always, as we have more people, demand will be growing. And also a lot of this built on the assumption that hydrology or hydroclimate is going to be stationary, meaning that we will have enough rain and snow to feed our watersheds, to make sure there's enough water in our watersheds to bring to people, and or for watersheds that depend on snowpack, there will be enough snowpack. And what we are seeing with climate change is that second bullet point on hydrological stationarity is definitely being. There's a big question mark around it. There's a lot of uncertainty around water and how much the hydrologic cycle and how much water exists in different times and how it can be used to meet demand of our communities and people. As I said, this is a linear system. So it's one and one's true. So water comes from a source, we treat it once, we treat it to one quality, it goes to different purposes and treat it back. However, one of the missing pieces in this system is that water demand is not really assumed as something we have to focus on. It's not, as I said, you're focusing on supply side management. So water demand, however, I would argue is a cornerstone of building water resilient cities. Understanding and managing water demand is quite crucial for sort of ensuring sustainable water supplies and efficient water use and our ability to withstand and adapt to various challenges such as climate change, population growth, infrastructure limitations. A lot of the infrastructure we depend on in developed countries sort of reaching the end of their design life. So they need to be rebuilt, or they have to be maintained with a higher frequency and a higher cost. So it is important to think about how demand is sort of fitting into this equation. And as we're thinking about optimizing our resource allocation and creating resilient water cities. But what is demand? Often when we think about demand, people think about water demand as driven by climate, by population, by demographic and economics, like the cost of water, price of water. And while those are absolutely true, depending on where you are, some of those can be a lot more highlighted and some can be a lot less important. Often when we think about demand, we think about, okay, we have to focus on conservation. We have to reduce water loss. We have to use water more efficiently. When it comes to efficiency, sort of can we do the same task to use water to accomplish the same, can we use reduce the amount of water we use to accomplish the same tasks? And then often when it comes to the agencies and utilities that bring water to us, they're constantly worried that there's a bottom to how much demand management can be done, because eventually they will lose their flexibility when you sort of an agility to respond to droughts. While all of these can be true in some cases, I would argue that especially the demand hardening is sort of shows the limitation of our systems. And that's where I want to argue that there are other ideas that can actually help us to rethink and reimagine how we do demand. Demand is much more complex and dynamic than we imagine. There are a lot of new technologies that can change the way we use water. Human behavior has shown to be very important in the way people use water and how much they use. As we move to cities that are denser, the amount of water we use is going to change. We actually have an opportunity now to fit water quality to purpose, meaning that to use different quality of water for different purposes that we have. So from technological side and human behavior side, we are actually making a lot of progress and changing the sort of the demand dynamics in many ways. So, and we need to embrace that sort of evolution as we're thinking about future cities. So as we transition to this 21st century infrastructure model, we have to kind of embrace fresh thinking, which is sort of transition from supply side management to demand side management when it comes to water. Now, in developed countries or cities that are already well established, often this is just general, and it can be different depending on city to city, to community, or country to country. But overall, when you think about indoor water use, people use their waters to flush toilets, to wash their clothes, to shower, to through their faucets, to wash hands or do cooking, leaks, and a few other things that people do in their homes. And when you're thinking about a little bit more of suburban areas where people have outdoor spaces, a lot of that water also goes to use to maintaining outdoor spaces. For example, in the US, we use about 60%, on average, 60% of our water to maintain outdoor spaces. So that's a significant amount of water. And remember, we talked about linear systems. So we treat this water to the highest quality. We use energy, resources, and bring it to people. And then it's used for flushing toilets or maintaining our outdoor water use. So that's like a very inefficient system when you think about it. So in this context, we can actually think about how we can change the efficiency of this system and think about, are there any ways we can embrace circular economy when it comes to water use? And again, it's not just residential water use. It's also when you're thinking about commercial water use, the same sort of equation applies, because a lot of outdoor water use is associated with commercial landscape as well. Now, many of you might be familiar with what's going on in the energy sector, but the reality is the 21st century hybrid urban water infrastructure model needs to be different from this linear, once true and sort of hidden water infrastructure model. It needs to embrace distributed solutions at various scales. So when we are thinking about demand, now I'm going back to demand again, we have to think about not just what we can do behind the meter, but also the front of the meter. Behind the meter, people can change the way they use water. We can do, use our shower water to flush toilets, or use rainwater or gather rainwater to maintain outdoor spaces. We can use laundry water to, again, maintain outdoor spaces, or repurpose that water for other uses that doesn't need that higher quality water. Those are activities that can happen behind the meter, and those are going to change the demand baseline fundamentally. So if, for example, in a city that we live today, somebody uses 60 gallons per person per day, some of these activities that happens behind the meter can change the water use by 30 to 40 or sometimes by 50%. So all of a sudden you go from 60 gallons per person per day to 30 gallons per person per day, which is a significant reduction in the baseline demand. In front of the meter, a lot of utilities are focusing, which is actually their main focus when we are talking about utility, building resilient cities, and diversifying their water supply portfolio, which is absolutely important. It goes back to trying to use water, to do more water reuse at a sort of centralized scale, treat water and store it in groundwater or different storage spaces as a conjunctive use. They are trying to sort of do brackish water desal, use smart technologies and smart solution and digital tools to make their infrastructure more efficient, or detect leaks or reduce inefficiencies in the system, and also trying to capture water and rain in different spaces or stormwater in different parts by implementing green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And these two need to go hand in hand, because if we are not thinking about what can happen behind the meter, we can create a very inefficient and sometimes oversized supply portfolio that might not have enough demand for it. And in future cities, we actually need to think about demand as I said, as a cornerstone of how we build these new systems. So it goes back to, can we think about what's the minimum amount of water that can be used, the most efficient way of building homes, and using homes as a building blocks of these systems that we are putting together. This way we can create more flexibility, resiliency, and reliability. Again, I touched on this in the previous slide, but I'm going to, for the sake of discussion, sort of reiterate this. It is important to think about conservation and efficiency in the homes that we have, but also communities, people, homeowners are actually transitioning from not just being consumer of water, they actually can produce water by creating or implementing reuse and recycling in their homes, using shower water for toilet, laundry water for outdoor spaces, or many other ways that we can reuse and recycle water within our homes. And I call those people prosumers because they're not only produce water, they also consume water. These are not people who are going off the grid. They're still on the grid, but the amount of water they're taking out of the grid is much smaller or much less than when they when they are sort of taking all the resource from the grid. So as we're thinking about infrastructure investment and supply side management, we have to, sort of rethinking this supply side infrastructure strategy. We have to think data centric, circular, distributed, and modular. So to avoid building super oversized and underutilized infrastructure portfolio, we have to think about how we can reduce our baseline. So that goes back to how can we think about demand differently? How can we create these prosumers who use a lot less water, take less water out of the environment, and also participate in the infrastructure redesign? We have to actually, a lot of these utilities that we depend on, they actually, the way that their business model have been designed is based on building infrastructure, basically those supply side model, building infrastructure and charging consumers for the services that they're providing. So as people use less water or as they reduce their baseline, these utilities, their financial stability can be impacted significantly. So the idea here is to think about how we can rethink the governance of these utilities in a way that they can adjust to this new reality and basically be able to maintain their financial health as part of that. Another part of this, trying to add, and again, and another side of this whole thing is to address affordability, which means that can we actually think about, if we build oversized, underutilized infrastructure, somebody has to pay that for that infrastructure, which means that our water can become eventually more and more unaffordable. So thinking data-centric, circular, and distributed, and focusing on demand can actually help us to become more, can make our system more affordable. So this is not just a dream. A lot of these actually is happening in different parts of the world. I'm just going to use the city that I live in, San Francisco. We actually passed an ordinance just recently, not recently, actually about 10 years ago, to allow homes and buildings that are larger than 100,000 square foot to use water to build actually on-site reuse systems. They basically, so now many of these companies that know how to implement on-site reuse systems are working in the city to help implement this ordinance that we passed. So these are the examples that we have. There are tall buildings such as Salesforce Tower that uses on-site reuse. There are other buildings that are using water from their showers, sinks, foundation water, all this different kind of water and rainwater to use it for toilet flushing or outdoor water use. We can also see in this other picture, this is the Microsoft campus in the peninsula of the Bay Area, and they are using on-site reuse to maintain their outdoor spaces. And the one on the left, it's a brewery that actually using its water, reusing its water. So here, going back to this concept of 21st century hybrid urban water infrastructure model, we are going to build, it's going to be very different from what we have right now. It is going to take a lot less from the ecosystem that we depend on. It's going to be a lot less, have a lot less water footprint, which means that you can leave more water in the environment for the ecosystem to survive and thrive, especially because a lot of our ecosystem is dwindling due to climate change and the reduction in water in our rivers and environments. And then we'll bring it to the city and try to use it and reuse it as many times as we can before we actually treat it and put it back to the environment. And again, I'm emphasizing the fact that this reuse and recycling needs to happen at every scale, from small home building scale to neighborhood scale to regions and state level or bigger boundaries. And we have to focus on watersheds as we are thinking about water and how it's transitioned. And this data-centric, circular, and modular system is going to not only, utilities are not going to be only players, consumers and customers are going to become water producers, as I said, prosumers. And data and information is going to be key in this part, because we need to know how much water do we need, where and when, and with what quality. And that means that we have to have a lot of sensors and information that needs to be gathered, that's going to feed into our operational processes and optimize our systems. Again, another thing that is important to remember is solar panels were not a common scene many years ago, 10 years, 20 years ago. Now there you see them in many homes, many roofs. And these are similar to what I was talking about on-site reuse. These are very similar concepts. You are turning customers to prosumers. They're producing energy and consuming energy from the grid. It allows, it creates this distributed infrastructure, and also it sort of reduces baseline. To wrap it up, again, the 21st century hybrid water infrastructure model, it sort of has a number of foundational questions. One is, where do we need water, when, and how much? Which means that comes in with the data and information technology that needs to be embedded in this transition. A smart grid that can track distributed production and consumption patterns, and that's super foundational to this. What is an infrastructure? It's going to be data. It's going to be hard and soft, or hard and physical infrastructure, such as pipes and pumps and any other hard infrastructure we think about, but also soft infrastructure such as data, decision support tools, IT systems, smart meters. All of that needs to also be accounted for as part of that infrastructure. AI and machine learning tools that everybody talks about, those are going to play a significant role in the way we manage and operate our systems. And then the question is, so how do we measure the performance of our systems in this kind of new cities? We need to think across boundaries. We need to think about energy and water, carbon and water, land use and water. So we need to be a lot more strategic when we think about this. For example, when we think about green infrastructure or nature-based solutions, those are all very much in need of better tracking and better performance measure to make sure they fit into our cities. So what kind of business model such a city needs? It needs to be a very different business model from what we have right now. Again, it's going to be circular, data-driven, and customer-centric, which is very, very different from what we have right now, which is top-down, linear, and mostly and hidden. Which means that we have to rethink and reimagine the policy and governance needs of this system. We have to rethink the financial health of the utilities, decouple the financial health from its heavily dependent. It's, as I said, is heavily dependent on water sales. We have these new cities or communities need to transition from that model and be a lot less dependent on that system. And with that, I'm just going to close and open it up to any questions the audience have.
Thank you so much, Newsha. Let me pop us into audience view here. And I think we have one question already. So I'll pop that up on the screen. Newsha, here is one of the questions. And for anyone else who wants to ask any questions or comment anything, feel free to head to the Q&A section and answer your question in there or in the chat itself. And if you want to ask anonymously, you have that option too.
Yeah, so that's a great question on technologies versus retrofit, that for retrofit and implementation. So right now, for example, as I mentioned, on these on-site reuse systems that we do in San Francisco, the new buildings that are popping up, either 100,000 square foot or higher, they actually, there are systems that you bring in, technology providers that come in, they figure out all the different waters that sort of flow in your systems and try to actually redesign the building with that in mind. So there are different piping set up, water is used, sort of collected, treated, and then repurposed for different needs that we have in these buildings. As I said, for flushing toilets, using outdoor spaces, or HVAC systems, or any other ways that we use water. On the retrofit side, is slightly different. We have now technologies that are being introduced around using shower water, or using shower water multiple times, or actually taking shower water, treating it very lightly and reusing it for toilet flushing, which is actually quite major, because if you think about it, we use about 30% of our water in our showers and 30% for flushing toilets. So this two sort of very nicely fit hand in hand to sort of reduce our demand in our homes almost by 30%. So that is those systems already exist in the market, and people can take them and basically, as they retrofit their toilets or their bathrooms, they can do that. And there are also systems that can be set up to use laundry water for outdoor spaces, and those are also already exist. There are people out there, contractors that can come in and install those systems for people. Again, they're not something that it's commonplace yet, but the technologies are there and there are solutions that are being offered. So they're definitely a possibility.
Thank you, Newsha. I'll pop up the next one here up on screen.
Yeah, so again, as I said, the digital solutions and smart solutions are going to be key in here. It's going to be all about, like, how do you sort of understand where do you need water? How much do you need water? Also remember, like right now, the systems that we have, it's operated and maintained in a very, as I said, linear way and very data it's not digitally sort of tracked as well as it should be. So as we're thinking about these like hybrid systems, people producing and consuming water versus centralized systems, it is important to know what's the pressure in the pipelines, how that pressure needs to be managed as people use different amount of water at different times, if they're basically generating water versus taking water from the system. So these are all very, very important. And that means that you have to sort of deploy digital tools to be able to figure out not just quantity of water that's moving in our system, but the pressure and the quality. All of that is going to be super important. And also, again, to make sure these systems are operated in the best way, we have to have a lot of sensors to make sure the quality needs, the water quality is meeting all the regulatory requirements. So those needs to be part of the smart systems that sort of track the quality and sort of provides information to people and individuals about what is going on if there's a system failure or something. Another part of it is sort of, for example, Nest for water. We have these systems in our homes now that tracks our energy use and tells us what's the most eco-friendly way to use energy. The same thing can happen to water. For example, when you're doing on-site reuse or repurposing water for different needs, you might want to think about when can you use the least amount of least costly energy to do some of that, so you can match your energy use and water use. But none of this can happen unless we have a very good data system set up and models that can sort of overlay these data systems, and that's going to be key.
Thank you so much. And then there's one more here, and I guess we can take 1 to 2 more questions here, and then we'll start wrapping up.
Yeah, so are there any examples of cities that have successfully implemented some of these solutions? Yes, for example, as I said, San Francisco is right now already have about 80 buildings that are using on-site or in the process of being built using these on-site reuse system or implemented these on-site reuse systems. There are also a few collaborative efforts that are going on to reduce indoor water use to 50 liter per day. That's an initiative called 50 liter homes. That's a very low amount of water. It's about 30 gallon per person per day, which is 30 gallon in the home. So which is very, very low. And that effort is sort of going to, they have picked a few cities that are implementing pilot projects. I think one is in Los Angeles and other parts of the world. There are cities like Singapore that have been using reusing water as a centralized way, and they have been very efficient. They actually almost reuse their entire water, and they treat it. They put it back in their reservoirs and again repurpose it. So that is happening already. So there are, and actually, city of Austin just in the U.S. just passed a similar ordinance that that San Francisco passed in 2012 to promote or to require all these taller or high rises to incorporate on-site reuse systems. But again, I would just reemphasize the fact that a lot of this has been policy driven. We have to have the right policies in place to enable these transitions. A lot of things that we are facing right now is not a technological limitation. A lot of it is policy limitation. So we have to kind of be able to have the right policies in place to encourage the uptake and implementation of these solutions. And that's why that's very much matters, rethinking governance and governance systems and policy levers that needs to be put in place.
Thank you so much. There's one more here. There we go.
How to apply this methodology to actually existing buildings that were not designed to such a performance? Is it possible? Yes, absolutely. So as I said, for example, there are people who can, the contractors that come in and actually very simply sort of connect your laundry machine to a system that can then take the water and use it for outdoor water use. Those are very easily set up. There are also, as I said, there are technologies right now that can be implemented that takes your shower water, store it, and then repurpose it for toilet flushing. There are some treatment happens there because you don't want the shower water to sit for a long time on its own. So there needs to be minor treatment happening to repurpose it, but it doesn't need to be a drinkable quality. That's a key point. We don't want to use, we use water in so many different ways. Not every water that we use needs to be drinkable quality. So fitting quality to purpose is going to be key to reduce our carbon footprint and environmental footprint. So yes, as I said, there are technologies out there that can be repurposed and used for that piece. And then again, so a lot of these are retrofit models. They're not. They don't need to be for new buildings. So and they're going to be retrofit is going to be key in making sure to close that gap.
And I saw that Peter just asked the question in the chat as well. Could you comment on such cities which implement these solutions, if there are some regulation efforts to incentivize them?
Yes, absolutely. So as I said, for example, San Francisco in 2012 passed an ordinance that required every building that is larger than 250,000 square foot or higher to repurpose all their extra water from showers to toilets to faucets to foundation water, all of that water to be treated and repurposed for toilet flushing and outdoor water use. And since 2012, that regulation actually has been changed to become for 100,000 square foot and higher, and potentially can actually become, require even smaller and smaller buildings. And there were some incentives put in place to make sure these things happen. I personally have been in a few of these buildings. In one of these buildings, the contractor is actually using the water that they're treating to to make beer, and that's Epic Cleantech, which some of you might have heard of them or have seen them. So they actually, so yes, so this is happening, and there is customer satisfaction. We actually there have been studies that have looked at the rate of return for these kind of investments, and actually seems to be quite good. And also remember, right now water is quite cheap. The way we have set up the water systems is very not just inefficient, but we don't really value the resource as much. As climate change is going to impact our water sources, and as we need to invest in more different solutions, and as demand reduces, the cost of water is going to rise. And that means that we have to think about this a little bit more strategically. And so that's really important. There's another piece is for US market, customers require high pressure in the tap water garden. For me, it's the first barrier to so some of that, again, these things go hand in hand. When we implemented the ordinance in 2012, it was a learning process. We actually our team, the team in the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission is putting together lesson learned that will be released. Also, they worked with the regulators to put in place the right set of regulations to enable this. So again, policy is going to be foundational to these changes. And so, yes, for sure.
Then I saw one more question. Maybe we'll take this as the last question, Newsha.
Sure.
Just ask you.
If we design new water infrastructure from the hybrid perspective, it seems that it should be operated as a planned city. Okay, yes. How should we approach the redesign of water infrastructure built in existing cities from a hybrid perspective? Okay, so the way in built cities it's going to happen is that it is going to focus on baseline reduction. And the way this is going to work out is if utilities actually play as a partner in this transition, they actually can make sure they can understand how the baseline demand is changing, how their demand portfolio is changing, how their pressure is going to be impacted, depending on who's producing water, when, and how. And that is where data and information is going to be super important in making sure that we don't face system failures. So as we are redesigning existing built environment and transitioning them to these hybrid cities, hybrid infrastructure model, data is going to be key. And as well as the governance structure. When we are talking about new cities, all these needs to be foundational. Basically, anything that's implemented needs to have the right set of IT or information technology and sensing and models set up to track them. And then at the same time, it's basically bottom up. So every building is basically the unit through which we are sort of building this community. So it's kind of like bottom up. In the existing city, it's sort of top down. It's a little bit messy. Not everybody is going to implement this solution at the same time. It's not going to be uniform. So depending on which neighborhood is using it, which neighborhood is not, it's going to change the way we manage pressure. So this is going to totally change the operational model that utilities have. So that's why if utilities sort of come along and play this game as a sort of as a group that's pushing these ideas, they can actually make sure they're part of this transition and they're sort of controlling how it's happening. Control is the wrong word, but sort of making it happen in an efficient way. But if they don't and sort of ignore this transition, they actually can be caught in a dilemma of not knowing exactly who's doing what where and experiencing changes without knowing about the system's transition.
Brilliant, Newsha. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for your questions as well. I think it was a super interesting and informative session. I hope that everyone here learned a bunch. If you do want to read up more on this, Newsha wrote an amazing blog post here. I'll just post it in the chat on redesigning the role of water in future cities. So if you want to have a read back, you will find it there. And just so that you guys are aware, we have one of these webinars once a month. So one of these community webinars. On each one of them, we'll bring up a different KTM expert, and the expert will essentially present different educational topics. So stay tuned for the next one. We also have another upcoming KTM in Action webinar. If you guys have not joined those are also once a month. The next month one is on the 26th of June. Those ones are essentially our Director of Customer Success taking you through a different KTM use case on each of these webinars and essentially walking you through our water management platform. So those are cool as well if you have not joined. And lastly, if you want to rewatch any of these webinars, we do record them. We will host the full webinar in our Slack community. So you can stay tuned on there. You can watch them back if you want to take any notes or see any other updates, anything that's happening KTM related. You'll find all of that, plus, of course, a community of water experts and water lovers in our Slack. I'm going to also post the link to the community for those of you who have not joined, so you can go ahead and join. We'd love to see you in there. Newsha, any final thoughts from you before we wrap up here?
No, I think this was a great discussion. I really appreciate everybody joining. Please feel free to reach out to us with any other questions that you may have. And obviously, this is not end all. So there are so many other ways to think about this. So thanks for joining and being part of this discussion.